since the chairman has gavelled out all of my colleagues with their unanimous consent, I am going to read for the record many of the chairman's comments in September of the importance of hearing from the whistleblower. Again, Ambassador, thank you for your patience, thank you for your service, but since we haven't been able to conduct ourselves in normal procedures, I'm just going to use the 5 minutes for this. September 29th, in the Wall Street Journal, quote, "The whistleblower at the center of the impeachment investigation of President Trump will testify in the House very soon." This is a quote by the chairman. USA Today, September 29th. Talking with ABC News this week, Schiff, the Democrat who chairs the House Intelligence Committee, said the whistleblower would testify very soon, and the only thing standing in the way was getting security clearances for the attorneys representing the whistleblower so they could attend the testimony. From Vox, September 29th, Rep. Adam Schiff said Sunday the whistleblower at the center of a growing scandal surrounding President Donald Trump will testify before the House Intelligence Committee very soon. On CNN, September 29th.
What's happening, people? Welcome to Dr. John Podcast again. In 2019, GOP lawmakers stormed a secure hearing room to defend Trump. But now, some of those same allies are retiring, publicly criticizing him or quietly distancing themselves. Impeachment articles have been filed. Over 70 Democrats are calling for removal. And the coalition that once treated defending Trump like a contact sport is visibly cracking. Here is the context that makes the allies' flipping angle so important. During Trump's first term, 2 impeachments failed in large part because Republican loyalty held firm. When the House impeached Trump over Ukraine in 2019, not a single Republican voted to impeach, not one. When the Senate held a trial, he was acquitted. When the House impeached him again in January 2021 over January 6th, 10 Republicans crossed the line and voted to impeach in the House.
Schiff said Sunday on ABC as well as NBC's Meet the Press that he expects the whistleblower to testify very soon. The Washington Post, September 29th. In an appearance on ABC News this week, Schiff echoed Pelosi's message. He also said he expected the Intelligence Committee to hear from the whistleblower very soon, pending a security clearance from Acting Director of National Intelligence Joseph McGuire. In the Huffington Post, Schiff told ABC's this week that he expects the whistleblower to appear before this committee very soon. In the New York Post, quote, "We'll get the unfiltered testimony of that whistleblower." In the Washington Times, quote, "That whistleblower will be allowed to come in." These are all quotes from Chairman Adam Schiff. In Talking Points memo, the question was posed, actually this was by George Stephanopoulos, "Have you reached an agreement yet with the whistleblower and his or her attorneys about coming before the committee and providing the information firsthand?" Quote, "Yes, we have," Schiff responded, "and as DNI McGuire promised during the hearing, that whistleblower will be allowed to come in and come in without a minder from the Justice Department or from the White House to tell the whistleblower what they can and cannot say."
And in the Senate trial that followed, 7 Republicans voted to convict. That number 7 was historic. It was the most bipartisan conviction vote in the history of presidential impeachment. But it still was not enough. You need 2/3 of the Senate to convict and remove. And Trump survived both times because Republican loyalty, even with the cracks, held together just barely enough. Now, the question for his second term is whether those cracks are getting wider. Whether the allies who once stormed SCIFs and chanted his name are starting to do the math on their own futures. And the answer, based on what has happened in the last 12 months, is yes. They are starting to. And there is one more thing I want to set up before we get into the deep dive, because it reframes the whole story. The question everyone asks about impeachment is always the same. Do the votes exist?
We'll get the unfiltered testimony of that whistleblower. In Daily Kos, we're ready to hear from the whistleblower as soon as that is done, and we'll keep obviously riding shotgun to make sure that the acting director doesn't delay in that clearance process. In CNBC, we'll get the unfiltered testimony of that whistleblower. In Market Watch, House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff said Sunday that an agreement has been reached under which the whistleblower will testify before the committee very soon. I can keep going, but again, the chairman refused to allow us to put these into the record with unanimous consent. So I've read those out, and as we know, it is important to protect whistleblowers from retaliation and from firing, and we want to make sure whistleblowers are able to come forward. But in this case, the fact that we are getting criticized by Chairman Adam Schiff for statements that he himself made early on in this process shows the duplicity and just the abuse of power that we are continuing to see. With a minute 54 seconds left, I'll yield to my colleague, Mr. Jordan.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. I would also add that the chairman has promised we'll get to see the transcripts
And that is the wrong question to ask right now. The right question is how votes change, because votes in Congress do not come from nowhere. They come from political calculations. They come from what members think their constituents want. They come from what members think protects their own careers. They come from what they are willing to defend at town halls and in primary debates and in local newspaper interviews. When 30 Republican House members were willing to storm a classified hearing room for Trump in 2019, that told you something very specific about those calculations. When two of Trump's most prominent congressional defenders are leaving Congress entirely, that tells you something equally specific about how those calculations are shifting. The storm is not measured in votes on the floor today. It is measured in the gradual movement of political incentives.
But there's still 4 people we've deposed that we have not been able to see their transcripts, have their transcripts released, and therefore, the testimony they provided we're not able to use in these open hearings. If it's an open hearing, all the available testimony from depositions that has been taken by the committee should be available to be discussed for the American people to see. But no. Mr. Morris and Mr. Hale and Ms. Williams, 2 others have, and another one have not yet been released. So I hope the chairman releases that. One other point I would make in the last minute of Ms. Stefanik's time. The Democrats have asserted that this whole thing with Ambassador Yovanovitch was part of some sinister scheme by the White House to get Mr. Zelensky to do an investigation, President Zelensky to do an investigation. If recalling Ambassador Yovanovitch was part of some scheme by Trump and Pompeo and Giuliani to get President Zelensky to do an investigation, why would they replace her with the Democrats' first witness, their star witness, Bill Taylor? I mean, if that's the plan, not the best plan I've ever seen put together. Their star witness, their first witness, Mr. Taylor, was here Wednesday. That's what they were up to? I think it just demonstrates that is not what went on here. Mr. Zelensky never undertook any investigations. And the reason the aid was released, as we discussed on Wednesday, was because Vice President Pence, Ambassador Bolton, and U.S. senators all talked with President Zelensky, and they were convinced he was the real deal, as the ambassador has alluded to in her testimony. That's why the money was released. That I yield back.
And those incentives are moving, slowly, quietly in some cases, loudly in others, but they are moving. And understanding that movement is what this whole video is about. Let us start with the most dramatic example of an ally flipping, because it is genuinely shocking when you put it in context. Marjorie Taylor Greene was for years one of the loudest, most visible, most ride-or-die Trump defenders in all of Congress. She wore Trump gear to official proceedings. She filed motions to block Democratic initiatives every chance she got. She went on national television defending everything Trump did with an enthusiasm that made even some Republicans uncomfortable. She was so closely identified with the Trump brand that when she had any political problems of her own, Trump would swoop in and publicly endorse her. They were tied together. She was his. And then it all fell apart over the Epstein files. Of all the issues that could crack the most loyal Trump ally in Congress, it was the Jeffrey Epstein files. Greene started pushing hard for the full release of all documents related to Epstein and the people connected to him. She held press conferences with alleged Epstein victims. She pushed for a discharge petition to force a House vote on releasing the files, and Trump did not like it. He reportedly stopped returning her calls. He publicly rescinded his endorsement of her, saying she had gone far left. He called her a ranting lunatic, and Greene fired back. She accused Trump of attacking her to intimidate other Republicans ahead of a House vote on releasing the Epstein files. She said she has supported Trump with too much of her precious time and too much of her own money. She went on CNN. She went on The View. She said, "I'm not in a cult." And then after she had left Congress, Greene posted a long statement on social media absolutely torching the Republican Party and the Trump administration. She warned that the party's handling of healthcare costs, the Epstein files, and Trump's aggressive foreign policy would cost the GOP in the November midterms. She said that if the party had put America first instead of the rich donor class and foreign policy, they would not have to gaslight Americans. She accused the party of calling the Epstein files a hoax and treating trafficking survivors like they did not exist. She told them to stop the bullying and name-calling. This is why the woman who once made a career out of being too extreme for mainstream Republicans was now publicly accusing Trump's Republican Party of betraying the MAGA movement. The most Trumpiest Republican in Congress had become disappointed with Trump. Think about how remarkable that is for a second. She felt he had abandoned the populist roots of the movement she thought they shared. That is not a small thing. That is the base talking back. And Greene was not alone in stepping away. Let us talk about Elise Stefanik, because her story is a different kind of departure, but just as revealing. Stefanik was once a moderate Republican from upstate New York, who remade her entire political identity around defending Trump. She became one of his most fierce public defenders during the first impeachment hearings. She parlayed that loyalty into a position as House Republican Conference Chair. She became one of the most prominent women in the Republican Party. Trump nominated her to be the United Nations ambassador. And then, less than a week before her Senate confirmation vote, Trump pulled the nomination, saying the razor-thin Republican majority in the House meant he needed her there. She was publicly gracious about it. She said she was proud to be a team player. But being pulled back from a role you publicly accepted and then announced is not an easy thing to absorb quietly. And in December, Stefanik announced she was not only dropping her campaign for New York governor, but also not seeking re-election to her House seat. She was leaving Congress entirely. One of Trump's most reliable House defenders is just gone, done out, joining what commentators described as a growing list of once loyal but now disposable Trump allies who are moving on before the next chapter of his presidency plays out. Section 2. Here is what ties both of these departures together, and it is the thing that makes the impeachment storm framing more than just dramatic language. When allies leave, they take their votes with them. They take their ability to block things with them. They take their institutional knowledge and their fundraising networks with them. And most importantly, they take their willingness to do whatever it takes to protect him with them. The people who stormed SCIFs in 2019, the ones who ordered pizza and tweeted from inside a classified facility to prove their loyalty, those are the people Trump needs in a second term if impeachment pressure builds. And some of them are simply not there anymore. Greene is gone. Stefanik is leaving. Other Republicans are watching their district polls, watching what the Epstein file story is doing to public opinion, watching what the Iran war and the Bolt strikes are doing to their constituents, and making quiet calculations about whether full MAGA loyalty is still the right political bet heading into the midterms. Politics is always about incentives, and the incentives for Trump's allies have shifted. Let us also talk about what the actual impeachment machinery looks like right now, because this is the piece that most people misunderstand. Democratic Representative John Larson filed 13 formal articles of impeachment against Trump, 13 separate charges. They covered the Iran war crimes in the Caribbean, illegally militarizing domestic law enforcement, defying court orders, abusing the pardon power, retaliating against political opponents, and defying congressional appropriations. Alongside those articles, Larson called on Vice President J.D. Vance and the cabinet to use the 25th Amendment. He also co-sponsored separate impeachment articles against Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth for carrying out the Iran war in what Larson called direct violation of the Constitution. More than 70 Democrats publicly backed either impeachment or the 25th Amendment. And a bipartisan war powers resolution to pull U.S. forces from the Iran conflict came within one vote of passing. One vote. That is not noise. That is pressure building. And the pressure matters because the question of whether it becomes something more depends on what happens to the makeup of Congress in November. And Trump knows it because on the 5th anniversary of the Capitol attack, Trump stood in front of House Republicans at a retreat at the Kennedy Center and said out loud that if they do not win the midterms, he will get impeached. He said it twice. He said Democrats are meaner than Republicans and they stick together. He acknowledged his House majority has shrunk to the point where 2 Republican defections could change outcomes. He described his political situation with an honesty that you rarely hear from him. And the Republican operatives listening in that room reportedly left with a strategy. Use the impeachment threat as a turnout tool. Frame the midterms as the last line of defense. The most powerful person in America is using his own potential impeachment as a get-out-the-vote pitch. That tells you exactly how real the threat feels from inside the White House. Let us also zoom in on something that gets almost no coverage, but matters enormously for understanding where the Republican coalition actually stands. There was a bipartisan war powers resolution in the House designed to pull U.S. forces out of the Iran conflict. It failed by one vote. 1. That means there were Republican members of Congress who voted to legally constrain Trump's war-making authority in Iran. Not a lot of them, but some. And in a chamber where the Republican majority has shrunk to 2 votes, any Republican willing to break with the White House on a war powers vote is worth paying attention to, because that same member who crosses the line on war powers today is the same member who could cross the line on something else tomorrow. Political defections are rarely isolated. The first one is the hardest. The second and third ones come easier once the precedent of not being a rubber stamp is established. And the Republican members who quietly voted yes on that war powers resolution are the ones who have already demonstrated they are willing to do the political math for themselves rather than just follow the White House line. That is the group that impeachment watchers are tracking, not the loud MAGA defenders, the quiet calculators. In a 2-vote majority, quiet calculators are the most important people in the building. Let me also tell you about something that does not get enough attention when people talk about allies flipping. It is the role of former Trump officials who are no longer bound by loyalty because they are no longer in the building. The people who served Trump in his first term, some of whom testified against him in various proceedings, and the people who are now leaving his second-term orbit constitute a growing reservoir of individuals with direct knowledge of how decisions are made inside this administration. Every time a Greene or a Stefanik walks out the door, they potentially become a source of information about what was really happening. They potentially become someone who can speak freely in a way that serving officials cannot. They potentially become the next person a congressional committee wants to hear from. And the more of them there are, the harder it becomes for the administration to control the narrative about what is actually happening. Trump's greatest strength has always been controlling the story. When the people who know the most about his operation start leaving and start talking, that control gets harder to maintain, and the impeachment conversation feeds on exactly that dynamic. More people outside the tent, more credible voices able to say what they saw and heard, more documentation of what was decided and who decided it. So let us break down what this all actually means when you put it together, the difference between loyal allies and loyal voters. Trump's voters, his base, his rally crowds, they are not flipping. The polling shows Trump's hardcore base is still with him. They will show up, they will vote, they will defend him on social media. That loyalty is real and it is durable. But that is not what the allies flipping story is about. It is about the people in Congress, the ones who actually cast votes on impeachment articles, the ones who sit on committees, the ones who have the institutional power to block or advance proceedings. Those people are different from the base. They have their own political calculations. They have their own districts to worry about. They have their own futures to protect. And when Greene goes from being Trump's loudest congressional defender to posting essays accusing his party of gaslighting Americans, that is a signal about how those calculations are shifting at the margin. You do not need the whole coalition to flip. You need enough of it to move at the right moment for the political balance to change. And the margin in the House is 2 votes. 2 votes. Any Republican who decides today's vote is not worth the political cost of full loyalty can cause enormous problems. What the departures reveal about the personal cost of Trump loyalty. Both Greene and Stefanik in different ways show what happens to the people who make defending Trump their entire political identity. Greene became so identified with the MAGA brand that when she tried to use that brand to push on something the White House did not want, she got cut off completely. Trump called her a ranting lunatic. He rescinded his endorsement. She was isolated, and she left Congress. Stefanik gave up a leadership position, accepted being pulled back from an ambassadorship, and then ultimately decided not to continue in the arena at all. She left too. These are not random backbenchers. These were among Trump's most prominent Capitol Hill defenders, and they are both gone. The lesson other Republican members are watching play out is stark. All-in loyalty to Trump can work when Trump wants you around. The moment it does not serve his interest, he disposes of you publicly and without hesitation. That lesson is not encouraging new volunteers to stake everything on his approval. Who signs up to be the next one on that list? The historical pattern that makes a future impeachment more than fiction. Trump has been impeached twice. Both times his coalition held just barely enough to prevent conviction and removal, but both times the numbers got worse for him. In the first impeachment, 0 Republicans in the House voted to impeach. In the second impeachment, 10 did. In the first Senate trial, 0 Republicans voted to convict. In the second Senate trial, 7 did. The trend line goes in one direction. Each impeachment peels off more Republicans than the last, and each impeachment leaves a documented legal and political record that the next one can build on. 13 impeachment articles over the Iran war sit in the House Judiciary Committee right now. A bipartisan war powers resolution came within one vote of passing. The conditions that historically produced more Republican defections, a weakened president, narrowing margins, visible cracks in the coalition, public statements of frustration from former loyalists, all of those conditions are present right now in Trump's second term. The storm may not be here today, but the conditions for one are as strong as they have ever been. And here is a piece of this story that cuts in a direction most people do not expect. Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, and Alex Jones, people who are not congressional allies, but are massive influencers in the MAGA media ecosystem, publicly criticized Trump's Easter Sunday threat to annihilate the Iranian civilian population. Not mildly, not with caveats. They said it went too far. Carlson called it alarming. These are not Democratic media figures. These are people whose entire brand is built on defending the MAGA movement and attacking its critics. And they looked at the threat to wipe out a whole civilization and said, no, that is a line we are not crossing. When the allies' flipping story extends beyond Congress into the media figures who shape what the base believes, the dynamics become more complicated for Trump because the base follows those media figures. If Tucker Carlson thinks threatening to annihilate a civilization is a problem, some of the base starts to think so too. And when the base starts to have doubts, the congressional members who track base opinions start to notice. It is a slow chain reaction, not dramatic, not overnight in a literal sense, but unmistakably real. When you look at the full picture of who is saying what right now about this administration, the people who helped build the MAGA movement are starting to push back at its edges. And that is a very different political environment than 2019 when everyone stormed the SCIF together and ordered pizza. In 2019, Gates stormed a classified hearing room to defend Trump. Now, Greene calls the party a gaslighting machine, and Stefanik is retiring, while 13 impeachment articles sit in committee. The coalition that once treated defending him like a contact sport is visibly fracturing, and the midterms will determine whether the impeachment storm becomes reality or fades.